This is not mine to fix. Hey everyone, I'm really excited for today's episode with Athea Davis. Athea Davis. Athea Davis. You can check her out. She has a podcast called Mindful Living with Athea Davis. And I met Athea on my book tour. Actually, I was on her podcast, and we really connected around a joint experience that we have both had, and is the loss of our child's father through addiction. And her ex-husband died from suicide. And the reason why I wanted to share Athea's story with you today is because I am a huge advocate. Not only is it Mental Health Awareness Month, but I'm a huge advocate of resiliency and, really understanding how to bring ourselves back to life. And this is part of my story that I don't really talk a lot about, and I'm sure I will in the future, of addiction and mothering with somebody who has an addiction, and also the loss of a parent or a couple per se, not a couple, but a loss of a spouse through addiction and mental health. And this is why I'm such an advocate of the work that I do. And her story will hopefully bring you back to life. And I feel like even if you personally have not dealt with this, I think we're all a few degrees of separation away from somebody who has dealt with this, especially during this time when we've had a really challenging year. But when I'm talking to Athea, what I really love about her, she's a yoga teacher, and she specializes in mindfulness and really helping children. But I asked her about, the effects of the loss of her ex-husband on her children or her son. And her conversation, her perspective, I think is really, really important for you to hear. Because as parents, I think one of our deepest fears is screwing up our children. And I think this is giving you a different perspective and opportunity to listen and to also realize the control and the healing that you have access to from what is right in front of you. So my ask of you today is that if you gain any clarity from this podcast, any value from this podcast, to please share it. Share it with a friend, share it with a coworker, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. You can also tag me on Instagram at Heather Chauvin. And we now have a website. Well, it's not actually a website. Well, I guess a URL with everything that I have coming up. So if you go to heatherchauvin.com/events, so EVENTS, events, heatherchauvin.com/events. I have the Emotional Freedom Accelerator coming up. You're going to want to check that out. We have a live 2-hour workshop in the Emotional Freedom Accelerator. So that's coming up. What else? I have a parenting workshop coming up. You can order my book, Dying to Be a Good Mother, and all of those links you can find at heatherchauvin.com/events. So let's dig into Athea Davis. It's not yours to fix. All right, let's go. All right, Athea, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Heather. Thank you for having me on the show today. Super, honored to be here.
I love having these vulnerable conversations, especially when it's pertaining to family and children and emotional resilience. I am all about, how can we come back to ourselves? How can we overcome? How can we shift our mindset to possibility? And sometimes we can't do that immediately, but
I was really inspired to hear your story. And I was actually on your podcast a few months ago or last month. And we connected, and once I kind of understood, well, not understood, but got to get to know you a little bit better. I was really excited to have this conversation. And just so everyone knows, I know you probably get this all the time. I do too. It's like, give us the nutshell version of who you are. Who are you? But kind of, you have a book. Today is going to be Awesome Sauce, and maybe a little bit about what that book is about and what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, definitely. In a nutshell, with a bit of sparkle on the side, as I like to say, I went through this really traumatic experience that sparked the inspiration for my book. Today's Going to Be Awesome Sauce, Daily Meditations for Youth, Parents, and Families. I was in a marriage for 10 plus years. We have a child together who is almost 15. And during this marriage, things just went really awry. Codependency, my former spouse was an alcoholic. And I had our son together. He was 3 at the time. And I said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I cannot keep repeating this cycle in our family. And I love this person, my former spouse. And we just can't do this dance anymore. Like, I owe this as a mom to my son to show him a different possibility in terms of relationship and life. And we divorced. And not long after the divorce, my former spouse really dove much deeper into his alcoholism. And when my son was 8, he took his own life. And I can really remember so vividly getting a phone call and losing all feeling from the waist down. And I had to function. I mean, I was in the grocery store when I saw the call, and I already knew what it was because I had these premonitions, these dreams, that were kind of leading me in understanding that something I didn't know it would occur as it did, but something really tragic was on the horizon. And so I was obviously, when you lose anybody that you love, it's devastating. And when you lose someone who took their own life, it just totally turned my world upside down. I remember, just trying to, I was in survival mode for so long. I remember even thinking, how am I going to tell my son maybe, and just to back up a little bit, right before I learned of the suicide, in this dark space where he really went deep into his alcoholism, he wasn't the dad that I knew when we were in our marriage, or even at the worst part of our marriage. He just started hanging out with people I never knew, lost his job, started drinking more, started losing everything. It's kind of like the typical, the alcoholic hits rock bottom, right? And loses everything, that kind of story. And that's exactly what happened to him. And he was spending less and less time away from, his duties as a father with our son together. And I remember thinking so there's trauma from that. And I remember thinking, how am I going to tell my son this? I thought at the time I'd just make up a story. So I didn't even have to tell him such a traumatic event happened. We just can't contact your dad, because there were times in our life that we weren't able to be in touch with him for periods of time, because he would be in some, like what I like to call, or refer to as just a deep, dark, downward alcoholic spiral. And so this is the context in which all this is, these really tough things are happening. And I was a person that swore I would never do yoga, mindfulness, anything like that. Very type A personality, go-getter, goal-getter. And I was really, a friend of mine invited me to take a yoga class. And I thought, okay, that's fine, but what am I going to get from it? kind of thing, like, I've been a lifetime runner too. Like, what am I going to achieve here? And I went begrudgingly, I guess, sort of, but something led me there. Mm-hmm. And something felt good enough about my experience when I got on a yoga mat that I kept going back, and I kept discovering new depths of resilience inside of myself, new depths of strength, new insight, by just engaging in the practices. Mm-hmm. And one of the teachers asked me, have you ever thought about becoming a yoga teacher? And I remember like laughing inside, like, me? Like, I didn't even want to come here, and it had been a while. And I thought, why not? I was, going through this identity crisis as I was leaving my marriage. The suicide hadn't quite happened yet. So I was, engaged in these kinds of practices, yoga and mindfulness, during the divorce. And it turns out that I just really, really felt what I like to call my inner spark. I call that the awesome sauce inside. I just felt so alive in that process as I was letting go of all these layers of anger and fear and, family or intergenerational patterns of abuse that I was becoming more and more aware of, and found it incredibly healing. And from that moment, I've dedicated my life and my practice to what I like to call tuning into and spreading the awesome sauce. I'm a mindfulness educator. I'm trying to do this in a nutshell. And I work with kids of all ages. I work with parents, work with leaders in schools. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So I write, eat, and sleep this stuff all the time.
Thank you for sharing. And it's interesting how our different stories and paths bring us to mindfulness, because mindfulness was my in to everything. I started teaching meditation to my son, who was 4 at the time. And I'm sure as a mindfulness educator, we can both laugh at that, because he needed to meditate, not me. That was my mindset of, he needs to do it, not me. Right. I'm the adult, do as I say, not as I do. And, you find it's interesting, because that saying of what you resist will persist and grow bigger. But I have found over the years that what I'm resisting the most is exactly where I need to focus my energy and attention. And this year or last year in 2020, I really dug into my physical health. Like I've done a lot of my physical health, but like stopped running away from it. And, I'm like, I really want to become stronger, and I want to really learn about fueling my body, and like why I want to binge on a bag of chips. And I was like, I have nothing else to do. And that's what I want to do, is just eat all day, because I have to be home. But the resistance, and to the contrast of that, the growth. So I would love to just talk about that, of like that messy middle, that brave zone, that, you're in that yoga class that you don't want to be in, and the trauma of your life, of your relationships, is present in your mind and in your body. And like, how do you process that when you're like, I don't know how to, I'm sure you hear it all the time. I can't do yoga. I can't meditate. I have too much pain. I'm not flexible. I can't sit down. What do you say to people that, have trauma to process, but they're resisting it?
Yeah, no. So that's a great question. First, I always like to invite them to just be curious, right? And we typically, have that resistance because there's some just lack of curiosity about what might be possible. And if you just put yourself even in an uncomfortable state for a small period of time, and just see how you feel when you do it, and try it more than once, give it a good, several tries. Because when we open ourselves up to that curiosity, we just might find that inner spark. And it might not be that thing, right? Like I may have discovered that, yoga is really great, and it perhaps wouldn't have impacted me in such a way, and I might be doing something else instead of doing what I do as a mindfulness educator and writer and all the things. But that curiosity is such an access point for us to learn and grow so much about ourselves. That resistance is such a great teacher. As you were saying with that phrase, that mantra, what we persist resists. And it's something in that resistance is the golden nugget wisdom that we are scratching ourselves to pieces, trying to find the right answer, the right thing, the right whatever it is. Mm-hmm. It's right there. And it takes that curiosity. And I would also say courage just to be in that discomfort.
What does courage mean to you?
Courage to me means to say what is on your heart, mind, and soul, like no matter what. Does it matter what this person's going to think of me, how they're going to, oftentimes we think they're going to judge me, or we're walking around trying to like look good and create this image. And courage actually is just being you and not really caring what anybody else thinks. That you feel so strong and empowered in your spark and your awesome sauce that you're just going to say what you need to say, what you have to say. You're not trying to get any result, right? Like you are just being who you are in that moment. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot, right, to be in that courageous state, because we have a lot of mental and emotional roadblocks that get in the way. And that tell us that our opinion doesn't matter, or it's just, I don't have the energy to do that. It can go on and on and on. Mm-hmm. And that voice just dwindles away until sometimes we don't even know who we are anymore.
Yeah. There's been periods of my journey where I really gravitated towards yoga and meditation and mindfulness. And then other times where I gravitated towards other things. And I always call them breadcrumbs, because it's a craving, right? Or a desire. And sometimes it lasts a long time. Sometimes it doesn't. Like yourself, sometimes people are like, I'm all in, I want to become a yoga teacher. Other times, or it's suggested to you. And other times it's like, nope, this is just a season. And that has been my path and my journey around like breadcrumbs and listening and saying, what do I want? What's the next step for me? What do I need to invest in? What do I need to look at? And while you're in it, you don't feel like growth is happening. Or for me anyways, I'm like, I'm just learning, I'm growing. What is this? And then you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, look what I've accomplished. Look how I feel. Look what I can tolerate. Look what I am not reacting to. And how do you get to that point? And then I want to dive deeper into your experience and like ask you some like woman to woman, mom to mom questions about your experience. But just that of like, how do you surrender to trust the process, that you're on the right path, and that showing up day after day to, yoga class after yoga class, practice after practice, that those small micro habits are creating the life that you want?
Such a great question, because, this self-inquiry type of living, meaning that maybe that is the answer, that you're always in this process, this self-inquiry, this, alignment-based mindset and living, asking and reflecting, how do I feel in this moment? What am I noticing? I'm a big journaler, so I journal every day, just freedom of consciousness in the morning time. And that's important to kind of reflect on, every day. And as, like I said, a big go-getter type of personality in person, very intentional, always looking at, okay, these practices that I'm fully committed to that have fundamentally transformed and changed my life have made such a difference. And how are they continuing to make a difference in all the micro things, in the way that I parent, partner, friend, teach, show up? Did I do what I said I was going to do today? Wow, I failed here. How can I change that? And I think it's just this constant looking at what my principles and values are in the framework of being a yogi. And am I living up to that? And where have I not really met that bar today? And giving myself grace and trying again. And I think a really helpful practice, I try to do this. I think this may be a Peter Levine practice. It's resourcing. I don't know if you're familiar with Peter Levine, but he's an expert on like healing trauma in the body. And there's a practice called resourcing. So when you get into sort of this negative spiral mindset, like this isn't working, or I'm not growing, or, I feel stuck, or, whatever that thing is in your voice, one of the practices you can do is you can either get an electronic note or a piece of paper, and you just look at the things that are going well. What have you done today, this week, the past 2 months, the past 6 months or year? So when I do this I like to do this at the end of the year and several times throughout the year when I really need it, especially when I feel like, am I making any movement here in my life? Am I growing? Like that question that you were saying that you oftentimes ask as you're following the breadcrumbs. And I will just write down the things that I've been working on, I've done. It could be impacts I've made, relationships with family, friends, students, whatever it is, the way I treat myself, self-care. And then I'm always surprised at how much I can fill up on that list. And the difference in the energetic shift that I feel mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, where I was in that place like everything sucks, I don't know if I'm doing anything right kind of thing, right? And then you come over here and you're doing that resourcing. You're like, wow, I don't know if you can cuss on your podcast, but
I swear a lot.
Okay, like I'm a badass. Like then you see like, wow, then you have to ask yourself, why am I going in that direction? What is it I'm holding on to that's leading me away from this empowered state of being where I've created all this really badass stuff in my life? And oftentimes, like, it will help bring up these unconscious things that that are sometimes like padlocked in our bodies and our minds, and just going through that process can help at least bring it to the surface, shed a little light, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, and bring awareness to it.
I love that. I love that you were like, can I swear? And you said badass. I usually throw F-bombs like every other sentence. And then people are like, oh, I had it on speaker and my children heard it. And I was like, yeah, it's explicit. Whatever our words are of choice, it's always the energy behind it. So if it's got good juju, is it bad? Are you just expressing yourself?
Yes.
That's what I tell my kids. I'm like, as long as you are not saying it at or about somebody, I'll let it slide. So what I'm hearing you say, and what I'm a big, advocate of, which I did not understand when I started this journey, is self-leadership and introspection. And, there's this constant refinement of reflection on who was I yesterday? How can I be better today? And, we're constantly reflecting on that of ourselves in the world in relations to other people, whether it's our children, partners, friends, how we feel about things that we can't really put words to, like time or energy or worth.
can you, like, in hindsight, knowing that you are the woman you are today, what has the death of your husband or your ex-husband taught you about yourself?
Wow. It's interesting. It sometimes, maybe even many times, our most hardest, painful experiences become our greatest teachers. And this is definitely one of them, one of those experiences. In fact, my former spouse, and from the divorce to taking his own life, really has been my greatest teacher and really taught me how to live in this, I guess the phrase that comes to mind is this personal leadership and being fully responsible for everything in my life. Everything I say, the things I have, I don't have, the relationships I have, I don't have, the goals that I've achieved or not achieved. It's that just 100% responsible and being in knowing like what I can control, accepting what I can't control, but really just diving in and being full out like, okay, I own this. And if I own this, whatever that is, however I said this to my son or showed up in something that I was writing or connected with a student or didn't, I have the power to change that. So I think one of the things he really taught me was what's in the title of the book is the awesome sauce. He taught me the inner spark that I have that I didn't realize that I had.
Love it. So one thing I said to you before we started hitting record, and I talk about this in my book, Dying to Be a Good Mother, a little bit, but I haven't talked about it a lot on the podcast, is that you and I could connect to your story in one aspect of it, that my son's biological father died of a drug overdose. And although he had no relationship to him and I wasn't married to him, there was a lot of that. And then getting sick, I was like, dang, look at all the shit I'm passing off to my kid. Like, look at all of the trauma that, this is his story. And there was a lot of anger and guilt that I held on to for a very long time. I don't feel like I do consciously now. But I'm curious what your experience has been and how you've kind of forgiven yourself if you had to.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a shitstorm for sure. Like for me, like I think of that phrase during that whole time from the divorce up until the suicide, even after. And I was angry. I had a lot of anger. I wasn't in that space. I was just starting out my journey into actually fully feeling, right, emotionally for probably the first time in my life. And personal responsibility and leadership, like what? And I had a lot of stuff to heal, to uncover. And I went through this process, and it was really through the practices, the movement practices, the breathing practices, the meditation practices, practicing in community, having a spiritual practice, really dedicating my life to something greater than me. And just understanding that I could see this person, my former spouse, not for all the ugliness that he was, I was, we were, but I could truly see his light, his spark, his awesome sauce. And so he became, and I say one of my greatest teachers, because through this process, as hell-bent as he was on wanting, like he was still fully in his alcoholism, right? Wanting to, have that sort of codependent, dramatic relationship. When I started changing my vibe, my way of responding to him instead of reacting, there were just big shifts. He could show up and I could see that. I guess I could see that inner child that was pained and hurt, without taking offense. And I could just, not all the times, not a saint. So it wasn't in all the moments, but I was doing this more often than not. And more moments than I could connect and say, wow, I love you, but I love you from a distance, right? Like keeping those boundaries too. So I could stay emotionally and mentally, spiritually, physically, all those things, healthy myself. So I think it would be that. Yeah, I could just being able to have that ultimate, it's been called that transformational forgiveness out of just the right thing to do, not right or wrong. So capital R, like that higher spiritual, like this is the right thing. Yeah. Right? I love you. And I can see all the amazing things you are. And I'm going to vote your victory that one day you can still, you show up that way sometimes. Yeah. And hopefully that answered your question.
And I remember, it's interesting when you remove yourself from the situation. I think as women, we take so much on that, and I see this a lot in parenting and women who are like, give, and you get so intertwined with this codependency around you being the creator of everything and taking on everybody's emotions, which is the lack of responsibility that most people are taking. But I remember when I got sick, and I think, to be honest with you, yes, I got cancer, and then his father died. And I just thought this was part of the plan. This is something bigger than me is at play, and I am not to hold this. This is not his. This is part of his story. This is part of his, whether it's a burden or something that he has to heal from. But as a mother, I can be his spiritual guide, but I do not need to do the work for him. And that was a big aha moment for me, that regardless, because I think so many of us operate from our wounds and trying to overcompensate for how we were parented. So we're over mothering, or, the what do they call it? The helicopter or the lawnmower, all the terminology, and burning out, right? Burning out, feeling depleted. And I just thought, this isn't my wound to heal. We can't take from other people. It's like, we got to heal ourselves, and they have to be able to heal their own pain.
Yeah, I thought of a term when you were saying that. So I think the practices that I was explaining earlier is something that we call detachment and non-attachment. And so the more I could detach from my former spouse and not be attached to his way of being, but what I call loving from a distance. Not that I didn't care, and that I didn't love, or that I didn't show up or try to show up compassionately, even during such a hard time. I was detached from any result. Like, it had to be a certain way. And I think when we have a fixer mindset, and believe me, like as a, like recovering people pleaser, fixer, I'm going to make it better. Even, through the divorce, and even still during that time, like, I know the answer. You need this, and this. Here's this plan. And I was just doing, more enabling and all of that. So still trying to practice detachment and non-attachment is definitely a process. But the more I could just say, this is not my thing to fix. I need to focus on what I can do, what I can control in my world, and how I'm showing up, instead of worrying about like how other people are showing up. Does that make sense? Like, because once I once I get in an alignment with my internal world, everything else shifts around you.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that. And I know that. But when you hear it for the first time without practicing it, you don't understand. Right? It's like, you're like, what? No, I really just need to fix this person. No, like you don't understand. I have to get my child to do this. If I don't, then, and it's like, no. So it is about awareness. And I truly believe that if you trust the process, your life is going to show you what's not sustainable.
Well, the crazy thing too, Heather, is like oftentimes we're not like walking around saying, I'm going to fix this person. It doesn't typically happen that way. Our minds are really sneaky. They almost put like these cloaks. We put on this cloak in our mind and we think, oh, we're being a certain way. We're just being, like it's disguised as like this fixer mindset might be disguised as I'm just
the hero.
I'm the hero. I'm compassionate. I'm helping. Look at me. I'm doing these things. And yet you are actually being a fixer and not paying attention to your internal world.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're rewarded for it. There's awards for it. Right.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting because I've had to have such strong boundaries with this part of myself for years that I feel like now I'm just able to like go out in society in this area of my life and have really healthy boundaries of like, this is all I can give. This is the capacity that I have. And this is something from like volunteering at the school or whatever it is. It's just the spreading yourself thin everywhere, realizing what are you trying to do? The beauty of that is if you stop doing it, you put yourself on a little detox and you're like, well, I don't know where I do this in my life. Like, just watch your thoughts when you've gone on a detox of like, not being able to talk to people or go anywhere, or you just watch who you're thinking of and who you're trying to like rescue and who you're trying to like reach out to. And the intention behind that, because a lot of it is self-serving.
So true. So powerful. Yeah. I mean, no doubt that, these are struggles that still come up, right? And part of having some kind of contemplative, mindful practice is that it helps you have that self-awareness about if you have these tendencies. And I've met many women that do, many also in the teaching profession as well, have these kind of fixer mindset tendencies, pleasing mindset tendencies that typically stem from a wound from childhood or some tragedy in our lives.
Yeah, there's somebody, I'm always asking myself, who was it that I couldn't fix? And usually when I say that, the person comes to mind right away.
Yeah, definitely. And it definitely shows up, in our parenting. I love how you mentioned with your son that you said, you know what, I'm your guide. I'm not here to heal your wound or whatever that will be for you, and how that impact with his dad, is and was in his life, that you're there to guide him. And I feel the same way with my almost 15-year-old. He did not sort of my path with him. I told him only kind of bits and pieces of his father's death. I didn't think he was old enough to know about suicide. He was 8 at the time, especially from the trauma he had went through. And that was a personal choice that I made. And just, it felt like it was in alignment with what was needed at the time. And then I didn't know when it would be right to talk to him about suicide, but I did, about the suicide and how it happened. And I, part of my my job, I feel like just being really intentional about being his guide, not fixing his wound, right? Like he has to walk his own journey with that wound that he has, that will, his relationship to that wound will change over time as he becomes more aware, in his developmental process and how these things have impacted him mentally and emotionally. And, I'm here to give guidance and love and, to vote his victory along the way. And as he has become older, I do feel more of a like detaching from that, like giving him space to be who he is. I think we've talked about this when you were on my podcast. We talked about co-creating and really co-creating what he needs, what each of us needs in any relationship and moment. And I think we know what that is when we are in alignment in our mind, body, and heart. So it's that internal language that we learn through some of these mindfulness, yoga, contemplative type practices.
Yes. And I think we're slowly waking up to this way of thinking as parents, as a culture. It's like water on a rock, right? These are the types of conversations that just allow the person that is open-minded and curious and has had enough with the suffering. And they're like, I'm ready to go on this journey. I'm no longer afraid of the unknown and what I'm going to uncover, or I am nervous, but I'm going to do it anyways. And I'm just going to push through that resistance and show up to that yoga class, or I'm going to download that mindfulness app and I'm just going to listen for 3 minutes, or I'm going to get out the pen and paper and just start journaling, or I'm going to stop avoiding and I'm going to take ownership for how I want to feel and what I want my life to look like. And it is a journey. It's messy. It's imperfect. It's so not what you think it is. Even though there's so many templates and blueprints out there, you have to create your own. And I think that is such a beautiful thing and also very uncomfortable.
It is very uncomfortable. It requires a huge mindset shift. And really a lot of what we've talked about is all about mindset, how we think, what we believe, what our values are. Those are the things that are driving our behaviors. And when we can take a moment and just say, wait a minute, who is it I want to be? I mean, because a lot of us, we're just like, oh, this is what I thought I wanted because this is the way I grew up. And I thought this is what I was supposed to want, or I was supposed to achieve, or supposed to, feel. And then when you slow down, which these practices help you do, when you do, and you can be in connection, in tune with that inner spark, that inner voice, you can start to find those answers that you're looking for. And you may discover that, oh, I don't want to be that way. Like, I want to be this. And typically when you think about who you want to be, those are value-driven sort of concepts. I want to be these things, they're typically when we think about values and what's important to us is we have to go into what are our pain points in our own life, going back to what are we resisting here, and what is sort of the universe showing us that we can have. And then we create from there, once we can kind of pinpoint what it is we want, how do we want to feel, how do we want to be, we can start to make those small mindset shifts, whether it's 5 minutes of trying a journaling exercise or being curious about what is meditation and how does that feel, and going and just, I call it sort of this soul adventure, if you want to think of it that way.
I love that term, soul adventure. It sounds fun. Oh, it sounds fun. Athea, thank you so much for this conversation. I feel like
I don't know. I feel like I just want to be around you, around a campfire or something with a warm cup of tea, having this conversation. Or after a really challenging yoga class. It's just so interesting how, one, when you put yourself out there, how people's paths cross. And two, the confirmation around following the breadcrumbs, like follow the things you resist and do the things you don't necessarily feel like doing in the moment, but are going to benefit you in the long term.
Right.
So I'm curious, I always like asking people, what do you think, like, what's your definition of a mom who is in control, since that's what the name of the podcast is?
Good question. A mom who is in control, the first thing that comes to mind is someone that is self-aware. Because when we're self-aware, a mom we can regulate our thoughts, we can regulate our emotions, we can accept the times that we can't and be okay with it, right? Because we're human, and we can share that with our kids in an open and expansive way, so that they are truly not just hearing what we're saying, but they're seeing the model of that. Like, oh, I may have just, raised my voice, but my self-awareness let me know within like 5 to 10 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, a minute, if it was one of those days, to say, wow, I just totally screwed up. I'm so sorry. I've had a day and I totally own that. And I want to start all over, and I love you, and let's hug. And it's also, taking a breath before you ever do it. And they're standing there waiting for you to say something. And you're like, all right, I was about to have a moment, but I love you. And I'm feeling really triggered right now. And I feel all this tension in my mind and body. And this is what I can say right now. And I'm going to have to put a boundary around this. And we're going to have to talk about this later. Like, that's another example. Or just saying, you know what, I love you and I just need my space right now. And then just being open with, hey, if you have teenagers, anybody will get this one, is like, I love you and I want to see you. I haven't seen you in forever. I know you love your friends, but I need some time with you too. So I think a mom in control is like who really knows herself, and it's that self-awareness and really knows who she is from the inside out.
Love it. And I would add giving your children the same respect, right? Like what do they need? And I like to talk a lot about like understanding our child's behavior, and that, if that's the way we are feeling, imagine how they're feeling from the situation. And we can just learn so much from each other, and you can still feel respected while being respectful.
Oh yeah, completely agree. Behavior is all communication. And, I think of so many times of my son going through the process and the trauma of his dad not being around, and through the death of his father, to learning of the suicide, and all the big emotions he was feeling. And sometimes he didn't even know why he was feeling them. And just being in that space and in that with him, not chiding him for feeling that way, or if he flipped his lid, that like something's going on, right? It's not that they're just flipping their lid. I'm in control. Like, I think of that, that locus of control that I can have through these practices, and know that, wow, something really is hard. Something really is, for him is, it's really hard for him. And let's figure that out. And sometimes it's just a hug. And then it's like, tell me more, tell me what's going on. And sometimes they might not have anything to say, and they realize, wow, I just totally lost it. And you can share in that moment and say, I get it. I've lost it too. Mm-hmm. And it's okay that you don't know what it is that you're feeling right now. But when you do, I'm here.
Love it. Love it, love it, love it. So where can people find you? You obviously have your book, the podcast. What else are you up to?
Definitely. So there's the book, Today's Gonna Be Awesome Sauce, Daily Meditations for Youth, Parents, and Families. You can check it out on my website at atheadavis.com. My podcast, Mindful Living with Athea Davis, and you can follow me on all the social channels at Athea Davis, AtheaDavis.
Athea, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure, and I'm just incredibly grateful that you've listened to the breadcrumbs, you've followed the breadcrumbs, and you are being a huge, shining your light on the world.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. It's been so great to be here on the show with you today. And thank you for listening to yours. You have been shining your light, with everything that you have going on with your podcast and your new book that's almost out in the world. So thank you for all you do and the impact that you're making.
Thank you. As my dog barks in the background.
It's perfect.
Yes.